Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm your moderator, Laura McGuire, and I am a research scientist with the Ohio State University Cognitive Systems Engineering Lab, and I am the director of the Resilience and Proactive Safety Initiative, which is hosting this series of webinars on topics around resilience, engineering, cognitive systems engineering, and proactive safety. So our goal with this initiative is to really try and merge theory and practice. We want to create more opportunities for our research to have tangible impacts within the domains and the companies that we do research with and partner with to advance the science and the thinking around some of these areas. I will drop a link here into chat if you or your company wants to stay in the loop about the webinars, training, or research opportunities that we have available. But I'm going to introduce our speaker today. Dr. Alex Morison I was first introduced to him about 10 years ago, and he was incredibly generous with his time when I was just a baby researcher in the Ohio State University lab. And he continues to be very generous with his time and is sharing his expertise with us here today. He has spent the majority of his career exploring how humans and machines think, how they see together and work together. And at Mile 2, he served as the chief science officer and principal scientist for 6 years. And he helped really build a collaborative and multidisciplinary design approach to the work that they did there. And he guided a wide range of projects and really helped shape the company's technical vision. And all of his work focuses on human machine teaming, on visual analytics, and finding creative ways to apply CSE to real world challenges. He has a lot of different experience. His deep expertise is in designing robotic and sensor systems that extend human perception and build computational models of attention to be able to demonstrate the importance of attention for those multi-agent systems. Before he was at Mile 2, he spent 8 years supporting R&D at the Air Force Research Laboratory, developing tools and visualizations to help analysts make sense of complex data and studying how humans interact with automated systems. I will turn it over to you, Alex, for the webinar today and fielding cognitive systems engineering. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
thank you, Laura. I have to say before we begin everything, I appreciate the invite, which I don't know was probably what, February of this year. It was a long, long time ago. I was in the middle of taking a very long break, and Laura said, "Do you want to maybe give a talk sometime?" And I was like, no. And she's like, "It's for scheduling, like way out, way, way out." And I was like, November, maybe? And she was like, "We can do November or October or whatever it was." And it turned out to be this time. So thank you for getting me back into things because I have done virtually nothing for a very long time now, which is probably not good. Skills perish. So it's great that this was a motivating event and it's really been the thing that's kicked off me getting back into stuff. So
I would
I'm
say
back.
raising a tiny human is not doing nothing.
It's not doing nothing. Absolutely. If anybody wants to know more about those details, happy to share. But for now, we'll just move forward with the talk. But thank you, Laura, for pushing me forward to get back into things. I appreciate that. So the title of the talk there, Feeling Cognitive Systems Engineering. I changed the title slightly from what you probably saw earlier in the invite, my experience helping build a CSE company. Once I reread the title, I was like, it wasn't me. It was certainly a team of people. It's still a team of people. So that was not a good, accurate title. So this is much more accurate. And please use that if you're going to describe the talk at any point. But first, a bit about me. This was my attempt to do some, you'll see later, representation aiding, representation design. This is about me in terms of time. I had other people look at this, including my wife, and in good Dave thinking, it was, this is great start, but why don't you rotate it and flip it? And that way it'll be easier. And so I rotated it and flipped it and it now looks like this. So time is on the bottom going left to right, which is way more understandable to everybody than me, I guess. Anyway, here's what my history looks like. It spans academia, government work, which is kind of overlapping. You can kind of see there. Background is in electrical engineering. I went from that to working for a little bit, realized I didn't want to work on processors for my entire life doing tests and stuff like that. So I went back to school and I got a computer science degree at Ohio State University. Actually, in the end, funded by Dave in the CSE lab. So he actually funded that while I worked in the computer science and engineering department in the computer vision lab with Jim Davis, doing some computer vision work. So I have some experience of what people are, I guess, labeling AI these days, which that is a form of AI, I guess. And then from there, had Dave pull me over and pull me into the CSE lab proper, where I did my PhD with Dave. And from there, it's a series of working for the university, trying to help support students and do research, doing it with AFRL, as Laura noted. Eventually, all that leading to a group of people at AFRL who really wanted to try and do their own thing. Several of them went out and did their own thing. And eventually I joined them later after they had started up the company Mile 2, which is where I've spent the majority of my career actually at this point, really, where I spent time with them up until I left about a year ago. And you can see over there now I've got family time and recovery from all the stuff going on at Mile 2, just hard work for several years, ownership. It's a tricky thing. It's challenging. And then what's next is to be determined. So I'm not really sure where I want to go next, but I've had some sampling. And so I'm curious to see what opportunities arise. I'm just looking around at this point, and this talk is hopefully going to help me figure out some other opportunities and other people out there. All right, more about me. I'm not going to read all these slides; they're bulky, but I talk a lot, so hopefully that helps. I'm a cognitive systems engineer through and through, thinking about it all the time, nonstop. I've had comments from other colleagues that have come out of the lab where it's like, you just all the time, it's always on, and it absolutely always is. I'm always thinking about the kinds of concepts that we're talking about, even when I'm at home talking with family. I enjoy doing the work. I enjoy advocating to try to get people who aren't practitioners to become practitioners. And that's really an interest for me, is training training people when I was back in the lab, working at the university, training people at Mile 2, training, growing, helping support people. That's what I love to do. And always with excited, interesting people. Those are the only two things I can't help anybody with. I can't make you excited and I can't make you interested, but I can certainly make you a better cognitive engineer or a cognitive engineer at all. So that's what I really like, is to work with excited, interested people, because that's usually where good things happen. All right, some caveats to the discussion before we move on. That was me. If you have any more questions, feel free to ask me anytime. Caveats to discussion. All of this stuff is my opinions, my interpretations of what was going on, what I think is valuable. There are many other people at Mile 2. There's people who've been there since the very, very beginning, the founders. They will absolutely have different interpretations of things. They will absolutely see what is critical or important differently than I do. So all my opinions. Also caveat, when you're like, hey, that worked for Alex, maybe it'll work for me. Yes, maybe. But remember, at Mile 2, where I did a lot of this, I was not just an employee, I was an owner, which gives me probably a level of authority that many people will not experience at companies they're at unless they happen to be an owner too. People kind of had to listen to me. Even if they didn't, they probably thought they did. So people probably, took in what I said and took it, with more weight than maybe I ever intended it. And certainly there were anecdotes along the way where it was like, you definitely you didn't understand how much influence you could have over people when you're an owner in a company. So when you're an owner in a company, it's a different deal. So these things may not work for you. Caveat. All right. Also, this is all from GovCon, government contracting. Mile 2 does the vast majority, so let me think past tense because I'm not there anymore, did the vast majority of its work government contracting. So that world is different, and it may be different than if you're in a private sector company or somewhere else. So you got to be careful that some of these things may only apply in that kind of a setting. We could at some point talk about what those differences might be and why it might matter. Okay, company, just generally, super strong group of people, incredibly strong group of people, cognitive systems engineering people, people who have been trained previously, people who have been trained there, superstar group of people. If you don't know who they are, look up Mile 2. Don't confuse it with the one in Florida, if that one's still there. This is the one in Dayton, Ohio. Super company, super strong group of people. Primarily defense, like I said, DoD, government, that's where they do most of their work, or at least they did. People who work there, software engineers, UX, UI designers, visual designers, operations and platform kinds of engineers. Those kinds of people who are there, they build software. That's what the company does. Previously, it was a mix of R&D, operational kinds of tools. We did a lot of different stuff at the time. It was kind of, what fit the kind of work we wanted to do and what we were interested in. And lots of work, if you're a cognitive engineer, is interesting. So we picked up a lot of different stuff. Worked on problems that you may know. They're listed there, planning, replanning, all that kind of stuff. And then we also, important to note, is we did a lot of internal development of training to turn people into who were not cognitive engineers, try to turn them into people who could think like cognitive engineers. No formal like credentialing or anything like that. We talked about at one point, but that's a difficult thing to do. So we just relied on focusing on internal development of people. Okay. So all those caveats, that's the company. What do I want to talk about today? Well, I could talk about a bunch of different stuff. There are so many interesting things that happened over the course of my time at Mile 2 and even before, but a lot of this is Mile 2 focused because that's the title of the talk. A lot of super interesting things to talk about. Here's a list of just a few that came to mind. We do not have enough time to talk about all of them. I want to keep an eye on the clock. Speaking of time, don't have time for all of them. Talking to Laura, talking to other people, what would be the best thing to do? It seemed like the best thing to do would probably be to focus on just a couple things, maybe three if we get there. So I went with what do I think would be helpful for people who are trying to equip non-CSEs with CSE skills? What does it mean to try to win future work as a cognitive engineer? Win work, so you can get sponsored and do what you want to do. And then if there is time, I would love to talk about representation aiding because representation aiding is, in my opinion, one of the core skills of a cognitive engineer. We have very few, in my opinion, skills proper. This is one that I think if you don't know, you should. And if you don't do it well yet, you should just always be practicing it. It is a skill that needs to be practiced and is invaluable. It's foundational. It'll help you everywhere if you can do it well and do it pretty quickly. Okay. So those things. Why? Well, in talking with other people, it seemed like here's some of the things that maybe sometimes some cognitive engineering people like us, resilience engineering people, or safety people have trouble with, which is some of these questions in shorter things like, hey, I think I have a lot of really cool thoughts and things to contribute, but it's nobody's paying attention to me, or nobody like hears and goes, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's go do that. Or, hey, that's tremendous. How do we get a project started for you? Or, how do we get other people to work alongside of you? Those kinds of questions are what, in some ways was foundational to the growth of our company. And I think, other people probably experience as well. And that's what we did a lot of was trying to answer those questions just because it was required to actually begin to grow a company. So I thought we would share some of those things. Okay. High level, before we get into details, and I'm going to try to give you as much detail as I can in the time that we have. Questions, thoughts, anything, chime in right away, chat, raise your hand, whatever it is, chime in. I love being interrupted. It's my preferred. But at a high level, what is it that, what's the framing that you need? Well, you always really need to be thinking about as a cognitive engineer, what's the value I'm providing somebody? And in this case, we're talking about your teammates or potential teammates, people we're working with. Teammates, sorry, I have the chat up. Teammates that you might be working with, what value am I providing to them? Or potential customers, what value am I providing to them? And they're different. And you've got to be clear and intentional about those things, that you make sure you're focusing on what would be valuable to them, because when you do, you tend to get their attention, and then you maybe even might get their buy-in on doing something, doing what you've proposed. And then the multidisciplinary team is like sort of the foundation of what we were doing there. Super critical. Turned out in the way we were approaching the work that it seemed both more doable and more valuable to focus on increasing our ability to work as a team, multidisciplinary team, those roles, those types of disciplines I described earlier, as opposed to let's just get everybody like deeper into cognitive engineering and make everybody sharper on all these kinds of concepts and doing techniques and things like that. So, working as a team actually ends up being, if you've got a little bit of training, way more valuable than just pure deep training in a particular area. It's what we experienced. Again, people may differ in their opinions on that. That's what my interpretation of what happened at Mile 2. Oopsies. Okay. So at Mile 2, we didn't just start and things were like, we know how to approach work as a group, as teams, and everything will go great. Didn't happen that way. We could easily tell that story. I could tell that story. Maybe I even will tell that story shortly. We'll forget all about this slide. But it didn't start out just being this great collaborative, multidisciplinary approach. What started was because of our size, we were small. We were just a hodgepodge of people that were pretty sharp, all working together on one problem, one type of challenge, one type of work, highly coordinated between us. We sat next to each other, everything you could imagine of a small team, and that worked. What happened was we grew. Win more work, you grow. And so we evolved that without control probably into a set of small teams, not one team, but a set of small teams that was doing something that probably looked like your fairly standard software development process, software design and development process, but not so like structured as somebody read one of the agile books and we implemented one of the agile approaches. It wasn't that structured, but it was around that kind of. It was inspired from that structure. That lasted for a while. It lasted up until the leadership team became sufficiently clear that it wasn't going to produce the outputs. It wasn't going to be something the team was comfortable working through or working with. There was lots of frustrated customers not getting what they wanted in the end, tons of rework. The nature of the work was somebody worked on a project and bounced to another project. You might have experienced this, I don't know. But when you bounce to another project, you're now working on that. But then later, if this project that you previous were on, but were no longer on, needed rework, you had to kind of jump back in and try to figure out what you were doing previously and try to solve whatever challenge or issue had come up. But then you also had to do your current work. And eventually you realize that as you move seats around, you might need somebody who'd never worked on the project. It was messy at times. And it always created a crunch at the end where whoever, it was almost hot potato is the way I describe it. Hot potato. In the end, whoever was the last one holding whatever was to be delivered and missed the timeline, they got it. That was their potato to hold and get burned. And everybody, kind of almost seemed like, I just got to get this done and hand it off to the next person. I don't want to get caught with the potato. Next evolution from one of the leaders, one of the founders of the company was, okay, we got to do this a different way. Alex has said some stuff about how we could do this differently. It's going to be tough. It feels like it's going to be costly, but let's try to do a pilot of a very collaborative approach. So we took one project, a group of people that were mostly handpicked by me, and we went off and did this one project. And we approached it the way I wanted to approach it, which was everybody's working from the beginning. So everybody knows what's going on, is participating in KE sessions and CTA kinds of things with the customer. So the whole team, software developers, everybody knows what's going on or is hearing what the challenges are and what we're trying to accomplish. Everybody's working on artifact development. Everybody's working on a bunch of other things. Second evolution. Third evolution, so that was great. It was being received well. It wasn't necessarily like efficient. It wasn't efficient at all, actually. But it seemed like we were producing what the customer thought were good results, and the team was feeling pretty good about it. Lo and behold, not anticipated by me or anybody, I don't think, was these people that were on the team weren't on just that team. They were on other teams. And they were sufficiently inspired by what we were doing that they started spreading it out to their other teams. So the third evolution was suddenly everybody said we're doing this approach on our teams. And there was, enough teams that's like, whoa, there's like, they're doing it over there. Like how? And they're doing it over there. How? And looking around, everybody was starting to try to do something similar. And they were all different and they were all unique, in part because of the work, in part because of what the people were telling them that had come from the original team, the pilot. It was just all over the place. And then finally, the fourth evolution was, okay, no, let's try to get control of this thing. Let's come up with what's the approach. Let's formalize it enough that it's everybody can understand what it is, but that we can also adapt it to whatever different teams are doing because everybody's doing different work at this organization. One approach isn't going to work everywhere. So it needs to be flexible enough. So that's where we ended up. And it looks something like this, which for a lot of people who've been in the CISA lab, it should seem very familiar. Mild to adapted these things, but it's basically the D cycle. Adapted it to our purposes and our needs. It helped us organize how the teams were structured. It helped us with what kinds of artifacts that we need and when and how. And if you get stuck, what do you do? It was framed around there's not a go through it once, it's a perfect solution, although there's misinterpretations at times even of that. Like this is about iteration and going through things over time and adapting as the project changes. And then we could also talk about like if originally in that prototype one, I had everybody doing everything, that didn't work. That wasn't a good idea. Maybe it was a good starting point. It was not a good idea for an approach that could last over the course of different projects. So we organized things around this. This is what has turned out to be there. I believe it's probably mostly like this still. I don't know for sure. This is what it ended up looking like when I left. Okay. But that approach was good. It was great. It was doing pretty well. But it had some surprises, of course. Everything does. Um, I thought it was going to be real easy to implement the D cycle with a multidisciplinary team. I really thought that was just, it was going to be no problem. I understand this. Everybody else is going to understand this. You just need to show it's going to be great. Other things, and this had to be fought constantly. It's too slow. If you do this, it's too slow, and too slow, too slow. It's a relative judgment relative to what? Agile. Agile's much faster. And I agree and disagree, sort of. We would have to have a longer conversation. It depends on what time scale you talk about. If you do something agile and you do it over a long time frame and you're not delivering what the customer wants all the time and you're having to iterate more and more and more versus I just have to do this, one approach one time and I can iterate quickly into something that's good. Was it faster? Was the agile faster or not? It's not clear to me. So it depends what you're working on. Also perceived as very resource heavy. And I've tried to draw resource core curves before for this, which is something like we've all these people working all the time up front. Why don't I just have like UX researchers, and then I'll bring in UX designers and get rid of the researchers and hand off to the designers and they'll design something. Then I'll get rid of them and they'll hand off to the software developers and they'll do their thing. And I get rid of them and now it's always I just have who I need on the project almost, or with a little bit of overlap. And I again would take I would take I can't think of my words anymore. It's been too long since talking. Uh, I don't think that necessarily is going to work the way people think all the time. And then finally, adapting to the right scale, how we approach things, that became really hard. We can talk about more of that later. All right, I want to keep going because I want to be able to get to as much stuff as we can. So that first one, thought it was going to be super easy to implement. This is where I think it might be really helpful for people who are watching the webinar, who are having trouble, figuring out, hey, nobody seems to understand what I'm talking about. This is what it looks like this is an example of kind of how I think we see the world. We might argue about the specific representation. I borrowed the above the line, below the line from ACL, John, and Richard, of course. John was nice enough to let me borrow it. Thank you to Richard, of course. Not perfect, but what I'm trying to show here is that for the work that we were doing, there's a work domain that existed. There was the work is practiced, who was doing the work right now, which didn't necessarily always exist in an R&D context or an Envision GovCon context. We might be doing something new that's nobody's doing right now. There's also cases where you can't even access the people who are practicing it, even if they are. They're somewhere else. They're in a place you can't get to, variety of things. And then there's this team which is trying to do something new and interact with them. And there's a relationship between these things. I try to draw the slice there, again, representationating 2.5D gauge figure kind of thing. There's a relationship across these and a coupling. And if you take issue with this particular representation, great, let's have a chat. We can figure out a way to better represent it. Here's what we as cognitive engineers, I think, kind of see. We see not a perfect perspective, but it's one perspective, and we see all the way across. We see from what's our team trying to accomplish, what does the work as practice look like, and what does that work domain look like? How is the work domain, how is the work as practice a reflection of the work domain and the constraints and the goals and the purposes and the functions and all that kind of stuff? And we see that stuff. And this is what I was thinking unknowingly about the D cycle and everything else when I was talking to the rest of the team about, hey, let's just do this D cycle thing as a multidisciplinary team. It'll be great. And after a lot of trial and failure, I realized they don't see that world. They see this, which is it's just part of the wall. There's nothing there. It's not like there's a hole and they know there's a hole, but they don't know what's there. It doesn't even exist in their frame of reference for the world. Everybody on the team, aside for the cognitive engineers, was like, I see people doing stuff. That's the work. You're like, yes, and there's this other stuff that's kind of fundamental, and the D cycle is helping you get at that stuff so that you make sure when you're anyway, the D cycle is helping you get at that stuff. So I was saying all these things in the D cycle, talking at somebody who had no concept for anything of what it was referring to. It would be, come up with an analogy. It'd be like trying to drive a car, or explain how to drive a car, but nobody's ever seen anything mobile. You only have horses, and you're explaining all this great stuff about this car, and people are like, I have a horse. There's no steering wheel on the horse. I don't even know what a steering wheel is. I don't know what you're talking about. Those words don't make sense to me. And that's what I was struggling with. The words don't even make sense that you're saying. They look like this. They were doing this. This is software engineers, UX designers, visual designers. No judgment. It has nothing to do with the individuals, has nothing to do with anything other. It's just not something you get trained on. And as somebody who went through the lab, and I'll refer to this later, I can't now unsee that world of work domain that exists. I can't all imagine myself again back in a place where I'm like, now, okay, this person can't see that world. So what do I do? And so I couldn't see it. I couldn't see that why they couldn't see. So moving on. Uh, okay. Thank you, Miriam. So I was dealing with this, trying to expose and try to get people to see this, which is terrible. And I apologize for this as a terrible representation. Seeing across the work as practiced. See, I tried to do a see-through and it didn't work. It was terrible. I had it like cutting through. Anyway, it didn't work. But what I needed them to be able to begin to see, to expose a world that doesn't exist for them, this wall, is begin to expose that somehow. And how do you do that? And if you go through the lab, we talk about it like, or back in the day, we talked about it like, okay, if you join the lab, it's going to take you 6 months even to begin to understand the words that are being used. Dave's talking to class. It's going to take you 6 months. You don't have to do anything other than kind of sit there and listen, but it's going to take you at least 6 months before you're like, oh, wait a minute. Now I understand what you're saying. I'll refer to that again later, probably. That's when you sit down and focus and you spend time and you don't have another job. Everybody else in mile 2 had a job. So how do we do this when everybody's got an actual job that has to be done? So we tried a lot of different stuff, and I'll give some more specifics of this, and try to give you exactly like what my approach looked like. But here's some of the things just quickly to give an overview quickly about what we did. So one of the things was to just give artifacts, meaning representations to be created, and we're just going to create those. You don't really need to know the why, or if you know the why and can understand the why, great, but you're going to have to create them no matter what. And they're going to represent the kinds of things that we think reflect the work domain. Now, what's nice about that is we can work on those together. There's many projects in mile 2, and at the early stages, I was bouncing around a lot. So I was going around a lot and like, hey, let's work on some representations. Let's co-create, or if you can do it on your own and I can give you critique and feedback, that would be great. But we've got to work through these artifacts. It's the only way that I know you're beginning to understand more. It's helping you on your project. It's providing you value in that way. These artifacts will become useful to you. And hopefully, as we're doing them, you're beginning to understand and you find value in that too. So a teammate will be like, hey, I'm actually understanding this stuff better and it's really valuable. That's valuable to me. You're increasing my skills. So that was one thing. We did a lot of reflection guidance from other CSEs, just trying to give feedback to the rest of the team. One that's really important is analogies, and making sure to always try to use analogies. So when somebody doesn't even see anything, there's just a wall there. You've got to go, okay, great. What do you know about that I can leverage to help then slap that into that wall that you don't see anything in yet, and begin to expose and sort of reveal pieces and parts as opportunity presents itself. We worked on things like, perspective taking and system boundaries. System boundaries is great, like helping people understand system boundaries. That was, always draw two, or always draw at least two, like super helpful. And then always the leveraging their background and experience. That was the one-on-one or one on a few, depending upon what we picked, where we were really trying to just take what their experiences was, whether they were analogies or not, or we just use their experience, and we would then expose them to that work domain through whatever experience they had. That's probably the most helpful and is one thing you got to look for in people that you're going to work with. I think I bring that up later. What wasn't successful? Holy cow. You take a cognitive engineer and you throw them with a design team and some software engineers and you give them some exposure, some people who are doing some work in a work domain that they can understand and begin to learn about, they will run. They will just run and they will come up with 6 artifacts that represent all kinds of different stuff that nobody else understands and nobody's generated anything at that point. They've already laid out a whole bunch of stuff. This to me was called running ahead. What turned out is that's not a good idea to run ahead of your team. I had multiple conversations with multiple cognitive engineers who are on projects. They're like, I don't understand why I've done all this stuff and nobody's working on it. I'm like, did you help them understand what you were doing? Did you participate with them in doing it? Like, no, it was, I just did it and there. And you're like, they just need to work on it. You're like, nope, not going to work, not going to fly. Nobody runs with you when you do it that way. Um, Too much cognitive engineering support in a project grinds things to a halt. Not a good idea. We tend to overanalyze. Teams need to move faster than that. Too little CSE support was no good. People would run in different directions, be incoherent. They wouldn't generate artifacts that were necessary, all kinds of other things. Um, we're taking up too much time. There's stuff here. We can share the slides or this was recorded. You can go back and look at it if you want. And if you want to talk more about these, please, please, please reach out, share, talk to me. Okay. Oh, wrong. There we go. Okay. Here is one way. So to just make it very practical and pragmatic, here's what maybe a session look like between me and somebody or a group of somebodies who were designers or software engineers. It could have been a separate conversation that we had. It could have been in a project. All of those things happen. This is not notional. It's a generalization of many conversations that happened. So what I would do is I would use the approach on those people to help them understand the approach, but by the topic that we were talking about. And then I would expose them after the fact to say, by the way, did you notice that I just used the techniques that we're talking about while helping you understand something about cognitive work? So this is an example that might be something like previous experience and background. So I would start step one. I have to listen to stories about you. I need you to tell me something about something you know. You may know something about a sport. You may know nothing about anything that you think is of interest, and we got to go to something kind of general, like driving or something along those lines. Mobility. There's all kinds of stuff there. And once I get some stories and I understand more about you or a set of people who understand something common, we then leverage that to go, okay, great. Tell me about what you know about in a general way. And I'm going to say abstract, you may not understand. Tell me generally, tell me how that works. How does that sport work? Tell me how being a dungeon master works. And usually what I would get is very specific things, or they wouldn't know, so I'd have to keep poking them to try to generate something. It didn't matter. The point is to generate. So they would generate something, almost guaranteed it wasn't going to be something that was an abstraction the way I was needing and looking for. So then we would go to all right, great. You've told me about, that thing. You've told me about specifics of, the generalization. Now, let's dig in then to a specific example, a specific context, or let's elaborate on let's narrow our focus on a particular kind of moment. So again, just your standard techniques. They didn't maybe know it at the time, but trying to emulate what we were trying to help teach as part of the approach. So we would go into specific kinds of moments and scenarios and we go, okay, great. And my job in that moment was to try to synthesize quickly for them, keep it in my head, but try to lead them through the process of like, okay, right, you had a really bad game. Why was it a bad game? What was the challenge? Or, okay, the storyline was really complicated and people had a hard time with that particular storyline and getting through it. What was so difficult about it? We get those kinds of things. We suddenly are talking about difficulty and how people are thinking through the problem. You go, wait a minute, that sounds like they tried to come up with a plan and then they tried the plan and the plan didn't work. So they had to replan. Okay, great. Now we're going to move back over to modeling and be like, let's talk about that planning and the replanning that people did and how did they do it? Did they do it in a way you thought was good or not? I could go on forever, so I'm going to stop. But we go into the frames of reference for the model of the work and the activity. And we start to elaborate it that way. And they go, okay, those words begin to make sense to me because you're talking in a frame that I understand. Then we can move down to, okay, now let's try to represent that frame in some way. What's that model look like? What's the scenario look like? What's the particular type of activity look like? We can start to practice our representationating techniques on that model or the synthesis or the general the abstraction that we're really looking for and trying to get people to understand. And then we can even move that further if we're really making progress at that point, to explore like, different kinds of concepts. We can go even further. And sometimes it worked out really well and things really went, people took a whole lot out of it, it seemed like, and it was building up that frame where they couldn't see. And other times it was a struggle. And when things were a struggle, we just stop and we wait for the next time to try to figure out what's kinds of activities, what's existing frames and experiences that we can use to try to elaborate this work domain that you don't understand yet. So hopefully that's at least one version. There's many ways, to help people begin to elaborate that frame. This was one that worked pretty well. It took time. Sometimes it took special moments. Other times it was just impromptu. Like, hey, I'm sitting here in a meeting. The meeting ended. We've got 10 more minutes because it ended early. Let's go through and talk about something like this, and we'll treat it as a training opportunity. It can be impromptu like that. There's always a good moment. Okay. So you do something like that, people begin to grow. What does that look like when people begin to grow? Progress, hopefully success. Well, for us, it looked like people begin to generate artifacts on their own that are not the ones that they have to generate. Like, so we said, like, you've got to do some kind of function-based representations. You've got to do some kind of temporal representations. You've got to do some event-based representations. Those are required no matter the particular project you are on. But there are many others you may generate that are just unique to your project and they help you understand the work is practiced, or what you're going to do. So they started to do that all on their own. You show up and you'd be like, whoa, there's a whole bunch of cool representations here. I don't know what they mean yet, but I would love for you to explain them to me. That was a sign of progress. They start to iterate more and faster. All of a sudden you're like, you can see, Miro boards and other things like, hey, I can see a sequence almost. It's hard to follow sometimes because it's a mess, but you can see that they're refining what they're doing and what they understand in their representations. That was a good sign progress was happening. Lack of iteration was a good sign that people were not sure what to do. People were hunting me down. People were like, I want to show you something. I think this is cool. Like, that's a sign that somebody's confident in what they've done. They're excited about it and they really want to show somebody. And I happen to be there and, somebody to show to. And if they didn't want to show me their artifacts, I knew something was very, very wrong and it was probably not going to be great, but you can show it to me anyway. It's going to be okay. And then this is the one that is anecdotal, but it occurred so many times. I hope for you, you get this one, which is somebody someday or a group of people someday will come to you and say, okay, that time you explained it in a way that made sense. This time you did it. It's been a year. You've explained it to them however many times you can think of and however many different ways. You've tried all these things and suddenly you did it the right way. And as I understood fairly quickly, it had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with them. They were at a point where they're like, I understand now, but they can't see that they're the one that is changed. And I think probably everybody who goes through the CSE lab would recognize this someday in the future. True for me. In 6 months, you're like, Dave, you're finally making sense in that design class. I finally understand what you're talking about. You made sense this time. Every other time was just a smattering of words mixed together. No, it was me. It was you. You changed. And now you can start to understand those words. They have meaning to you now. And that's an incredible, when that happened, I smiled and I said, great, perfect, wonderful. And yeah, there's other things. Anyway, keep moving on. Okay. So how do you win over teammates? This is what's really important about winning over teams. Same thing I did with the people at mile 2. If you want to start doing work, cognitive engineering work, and you're having trouble and it's not clear why, you got to start winning over your teammates by providing them value in terms of training them up, giving them new skills, new capabilities, which you believe are really critical. You got to start imparting them on those people. And you don't have to tell them. I wouldn't tell them. I probably would just keep doing it. And if you're doing good work and if you're really having good insights about things, people will recognize that and want to talk to you more, participate with you more. And so help them build representations, walk them through analogies that are like the work. Don't be a teacher, but be somebody who's co-creating with them, but you're imparting on them as you do that, the skills and things. So don't train them like I did with an analogy. Use an analogy in a project you've got or a project they've got to try to help them understand what the work domain looks like that they don't really see yet. Help them generate artifacts. Part of the reason representationating is so important. Help them generate artifacts. Critical. Um, what was the other one? This turned out to be a huge benefit for mile two, the collaborative approach. We saw huge benefits when that happened in terms of how people were participating in their teams. It took a while, but people enjoyed working this way as opposed to working other ways. I could talk about a bunch of different reasons why, if you want to know more. Um, Two things that were really hard, just heads up, working at the appropriate level of rigor. This is part of the speed thing. If you need to build a functional model but you don't know much about the work yet, you don't know much about how it's practiced, so you don't know much about the work exactly, you're going back and forth, don't generate me a functional representation that's like this big, that's all laid out. There's no way you could do that. It can't be true. So apply appropriate rigor. It may be small, it may be minimal, but it's a starting point. It reflects what you know. That's the sense of fidelity. It reflects what you think you know. People had real trouble with trying to figure out what the right fidelity was or rigor for a representation at a particular time, given their understanding. Also, I try to get people to coordinate different representations together. Like, here's the state transition diagram with some kind of functional model with a representation of what the screen might look like, the design. And that's another artifact. It's just another representation of the bunch. It's not special, only unique in that that's how somebody's going to interact with the work. But let's put those together and see how they're laid out together and combine together to justify each other, reinforce each other. That was super hard for people to do. I never really figured out why. Okay, moving on. Okay, so that's for team members. That's some of the stuff you might do. Again, there's a whole bunch more we could talk about. I just wanted to give some quick examples and some quick ways that we were doing at the time. Yeah, there's lots more to talk about. But team members. But what about customers? What if you want to get somebody to sponsor the work that you're doing? And maybe there's people here who have that particular aspiration or current work, that getting work from people, having somebody else say, yes, I'm going to give you resources to do that. What's different about that? How do you approach that differently? It's the same in a lot of ways, probably with just different constraints, different opportunities, different demands. Now, as opposed to providing value to somebody in terms of their skills and their progress on a project, which helps them feel good about what they're doing and provides them value. Now you're talking about, how do I provide value to whatever this person is responsible for and selling? It's the product that they have. So that needs to be where you provide the value, which is trickier because it's not you're not helping somebody by doing the work that you're used to doing. Now you've got to do a whole bunch of stuff and then produce the thing that is in the end usually what you produce, which takes a whole bunch of work to get to. Very uncomfortable for a cognitive engineer to do. So you need to be able to generate solutions, whatever those happen to be, for this person. That's not something they're doing currently. It's the future work. And what that really entails is, and I'm going to show an example of this again, trying to be really pragmatically helpful. It's a bounce back and forth on the D cycle between, for me, understanding the work, synthesis and modeling, and going back and forth. I'm going from trying to understand the work to how do I understand it abstractly. And then with that, I can do a few things very quickly, and it's really important to do quickly. And if you do that, if you can do that well, you can almost seem like magic. We've had comments from different people at different times that were all over the range of things like, I feel like you just took in and produced something that took me 10 years to do. You just did in the last 30 minutes. I feel like I've wasted my time. Or you seem to understand this work really well. It feels like you've got some experience in doing this. And you're like, no, I don't. I have a good understanding of a work domain and patterns and regularities in a work domain. And I'm just taking a work domain I know because you've told me about a work domain that's this work domain over here. And I can project forward based on that and use my other experiences that are from other work domains that have those same kinds of abstract challenges. And then when you're doing this for your customers, also always hypothesize more than one potential solution. Don't box yourself in with like, hey, I got one idea. If you only have one idea, say it, but try to have more than one idea. Try to have like three. It's really nice to have three. Gives more opportunity for somebody to say yes. Okay, Great. But how do you do that? Where are we at time? How do you do that? Aha, same thing, just looks like this. Made a little flow diagram for you, a little state transition diagram. First, you got to listen very, very closely. You're in a meeting with a potential customer, maybe the first meeting, maybe the second meeting, whatever it is. You need to be listening as closely as you possibly can, doing a couple things, organizing whatever they're saying into the appropriate frames of reference. If I guess Phil's still around, Phil is like the master. If you can emulate anybody, I don't think he actually shows you, but if you see him in a seminar and you're talking and whatever else, and he's drawing on his little blank piece of paper circles and stuff, he is listening intently. And in this case, probably circling all the things you're not saying that you should be. However, he's starting to lay out what are the appropriate frames of reference that you should be thinking about as you're answering the question that he's already asked you. That's what you need to be doing. You need to be saying, okay, this person's telling me about roles. This person's telling me about scenarios. This person's telling me abstractly about the work. They're telling me about different kinds of events they have. Whatever it is, they are telling me about the work. I have to really listen and organize it so that I can do another thing, which is uh, 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 start to figure out what are the abstract patterns, what's the abstract work they're talking about. So you got to note down the kind of work as you're doing those representations. So, oh, okay, they just said plan or prioritize or coordinate, or they said something that's a synonym to one of those words. Got to write that down. How did that play out here? That's kind of the modeling part. We got to listen really closely and be laying all that out. If you can do it in your head, which I tend to do a lot now, great, but I would start out by writing it down. Super helpful. Okay, then you're going to have a moment where you need to talk, either because everybody else goes silent or because somebody goes, Alex, so what do you have to say? Well, I'm going to hand it over to Alex. And there's interesting parts about like that kind of work. Anyway, you need to decide at that moment per that diagram. I'm going to slide a window over here so I can see. Are you going to do something that's going to elaborate on what you think you understand the work? Meaning, do I not have enough information yet to be able to project forward and propose something? I don't know enough yet. So I need to understand something more about the scenario you're talking about. I need to understand something more about the roles. I don't know enough about the cognitive work to be able to say you're probably having this challenge, or I'm going to project forward what you might be experiencing. Can't do it yet. Okay, that means I got to ask a question about more detail about your type of work. Go back to listening. They finish answering your question, whatever, your turn to talk again. Okay, hopefully we got to do the same evaluation again. Do I decide to say, here's what I think you might be experiencing, or is it I need more detail again? You can only do it so many times. You need more detail. Eventually, you've got to go, okay, great. I bet that I wrote some things out here that people have trouble prioritizing their work. You described they have trouble prioritizing their work. I bet it's because, when they're prioritizing and they're doing it individually, and it's not clear what criteria they should be using, or they can't articulate what criteria they're using. So their prioritization looks arbitrary and doesn't maybe persist very long. You've got this problem where there's a prioritization, but then there's always this reprioritization that's kind of always going on. And that's just as hard to do, if not harder, than the original prioritization. And sometimes things fall off and you don't know why. And they'll go, oh, yeah, we have that all the time. And you go, oh, great, excellent, wonderful. You're starting to now show them that you can understand their work in a way that helps them now understand it maybe a little differently, or understand that other people have that challenge too. It's not just you. And here's what other people have done about it. And that's where you get to the propose. Okay, so now okay, prioritization, reprioritization is a problem. Here's what we might prioritize to do. We want to help you by giving you a different system, or we're going to take the system you have and we're going to add to it these kinds of things. We're going to make the criteria very clear. We're going to allow people to enter their own criteria. We're going to allow them to order their criteria. We could do that for you. We propose all that and you go, and they go, great, that's an amazing idea. You go, great, I've got other ideas too. Because you've also, what I heard, a coordination problem. So you're going through this state transition diagram looking thing going, I'm listening, I'm understanding the work, I'm deciding what I'm going to do, either try to understand the work better, or I'm going to move forward with telling them I can predict what's going on in their world and the challenges they're confronting. And when I get it right, I get a hit. What can we do about it? That's when you got to go into envision the future, even though you don't know almost anything at all. but you still got to propose something. You must propose something. You can't just say, I'm glad I predicted something about your work. You must say, and here's what we would do about it. Once you've got a hit about something, they say, that's great. What could you do about that more? Give me more detail. That's awesome. Always, 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 always next steps. Don't end the meeting without next steps. There must be next step. It's another conversation with them. It's another conversation with somebody else. It's laying this out in some more written form so they can look at it and evaluate whether they like it or not. There has to be something next. You don't end without next steps. Or you ran out of time and it ends, and that's probably not going to be terribly successful. You don't know for a fact, but if you never got a hit, if they never wanted you to throw, they didn't like any of your ideas and you ran out of time, have a great day, good luck, that kind of thing. Cool. Hopefully talk again. What was that? Okay. That's what I would do in a standard customer meeting with other people. Okay. Additional thoughts. Um, uh, One is it not on this slide? I thought it was on this slide. Huh. One is don't ever do this alone if you can help it. Go with somebody else. In part, it gives a whole bunch of things. You can share time. You don't have to be always in the focus. It helps you think. This is what we did at mile two. We always went as if we could. We went as pairs or even more, so that we could help each other out and support each other. And importantly, you want to bring people with different perspectives. Don't bring two cognitive engineers. Bring a cognitive engineer and maybe somebody with a little more business sense, savvy, business thoughts, so they can help you propose ideas and push that proposing ideas forward. What could we do, and what would it deliver for you? That's really important, maybe the most important. You really need somebody there who's thinking about that. Okay, so you got to demonstrate all this thinking on the fly. Means you got to be probably more expert or experienced at doing it. You got to practice. You got to do reps. You just got to do it over and over and over again until you feel like you can do it pretty well. One of the things you can do is provide other examples. There's a variety of other things that you can do. Um, you know, One that's really critical that I didn't learn until much, much later in the progression is be very sensitive to the type of person you have in front of you. A business person, if that's who you're talking to as the customer, they're not going to want to hear almost anything you have to say. They're only going to want to hear about what somebody would propose to do for them and what's going to cost and what value it's going to provide. And so you might say a couple things, but they just want justification that you guys know what you're doing and that technically you've got some background. And then you just shut up and you let other people handle that. Or you got to go into business mode and say, I'm going to approach this as a business person, not talking technical anymore. If you got technical, longer conversations, maybe, but you still need to get to the proposed thing, which can be harder because with technical people, you can get into the rut of just talking technical stuff and never actually saying what you're going to do about it, i.e., proposing an idea that they could fund. Hopefully, they have resources. Thought I had a slide about that. Okay. So I will leave it to Laura now. We've got 6 minutes before this thing ends. Do we do representation aiding, or is there anything anybody wants to talk about?
I feel like this is fantastic. I feel like whether you could do representation aiding justice in 6 minutes or not, I think that is probably a topic for another webinar.
Sure.
But by show of hands, I guess, from the audience, do you want to move to questions or to representation design? So let's go raise hands if you want to do questions. And again, the raise hand feature is on the bottom of the Zoom screen.
I won't be offended if nobody wants to ask me questions.
I have no hands raised, but I'm not sure if that's because folks want to do representation design or because they are
Beauty.
scrambling for the raise hand. Um, what do you think, Alex? Do you want to run through this, or I have a couple of questions. Maybe some folks in the webinar have some as well. This looks That actually looks great. That revisiting the motivation.
Yeah, we could do that. That's
Oh,
perfectly fine.
Victor wants to do the representation
Sounds
aiding.
cool. Okay, if you like, let me just do the I raise my hand for representation.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So we can't do it justice. Okay, let's do this first. Revisiting those motivating questions. I want to apply resilient CSE safety 2 in my organization. Where do I start? First, train your colleagues. Use the D cycle. Have your representation aiding techniques handy. Find people who are interested and excited. Don't waste too much time on people who don't seem interested and excited about what you're doing. When that has worked for me, winning over somebody who seemed not interested at all at first, it wasn't because I did anything. It was because I was working with somebody who was like them, who did show interest, and they picked up enough that they went and talked to that person. And then the person was like, oh, well, if that person's finding it cool, maybe I should pay attention too. And that was the only way. It was, it's why relationships are so important. Um, Remember that, see eyes glazing over. They don't understand any of this world, all that kind of stuff. This slide people can look at if you want later. But let's go back to representation aiding because it's really way more fun. Okay. So if you don't know what representation aiding is, you should. And I can tell you that there's not really a good resource for it because Dave never published the book. So it's in parts and pieces, random chapters almost. It's not well edited at this point. Dave, if you're watching this, sorry. Um, but it is still extremely valuable. The key points that you need to know and what you need to learn are the stuff in the gray box. It's fairly straightforward. If you do these things, you can generate good representations. It's not something magical. It is something that's more like combining somebody who's a designer. And if you were somebody who did like physics in college or high school, and you had to draw graphs all the time, or some kind of class or work that you did where you had to draw graphs all the time to reflect whatever was the thing that you were trying to understand and analyze, it's combining a designer together with that same stuff. So you what that means is you first step always is to define what your frames of reference are. For a physics person, this might be like, hey, I've got a block sliding down a hill. What's the right frame of reference that I need to put on there? Do I do a world frame of reference? Do I do a box sliding frame of reference? For somebody who's like us, who's in work, somebody's trying to prioritize stuff and they've got different criteria, but they've also got the results that are there that come out of whatever it is they're trying to prioritize. There's people. There's a bunch of different dimensions to a problem, and you have to figure out from those dimensions how you create a good, meaningful frame of reference. Okay, that's step one. Up here on the top right, I'm showing you a frame of reference that I created for one of the representations that we did a long, long time ago using one that's old, but it's fairly basic. It's a radial frame of reference where the vertical axis has meaning, the extra line has meaning, and what it is a similarity space. If you're up towards the vertical, you're very similar. If you start to move down towards the orthogonal dimension there, the x-axis, you're completely dissimilar. You're not the same at all. And so anywhere in between there is a measure of similarity between two things. You don't need to know what the two things are even. It's just what we would call similarity space, represented visually. Frame of reference, radial dimension, similarity. That's all it is. So there's no even magnitude here. Radial dimension, are we past time? Frame of reference. Define your frames of reference. Define multiple frames of reference. That's what's going to start out everything. Once you've got a frame of reference, start putting the data in there. Okay, I got a frame of reference. Here's where these different things would go in that space I just created. Another word for frame of reference is a space. I'm going to start putting a space in there. I'm going to see what I can see from putting those dots into space. Psychologist, you're analyzing your data. Same idea, putting data in context. What can I see in that space? What can't I see? Can I see the meaningful things I care about or can't I? Once you put it in the space, now start to highlight change, highlight events, highlight contrast. He separated them into two different things. I never saw how they were exactly different. He still can't tell me why. So highlighting change, highlighting difference, highlighting events. If you can do it in the frame of reference, maybe you've actually got a decent frame of reference for the particular problem. Why is this important? You can do this to generate, but you can also use it to analyze. So you could actually practice this anywhere in your house if you want. You could grab whatever website you can pull off the web and say, I'm going to take this particular representation and break it down into its constituent frames of reference. I can analyze this particular representation that way and tell you whether I think the frames of reference are good, coordinated well, or if they're just randomly placed on there and I can't tell anything about change. I can't tell about priority or relative magnitude. I can't see anything that would matter to me. bad representation. How would I coordinate these differently to make it, or what frames of reference aren't available that I would add in? Okay, I'm past time. Happy to have more talk about that. It's an endlessly fascinating topic, and
You're
even
okay.
in
You
real
can
life.
keep going. We'll let people drop as they need to.
Okay. So those are the basic techniques that any cognitive engineer needs. You need to be able to quickly take, here's a work domain, here's the model, the synthesis that we've got. I need to help somebody else understand all that I understand. The only way to do that is through good representation design. You don't have to do representation design to build the visual display. If it's a software project, what's the visual display going to look like? You could do it, you could use it for that, but you can also just use it to say, I'm going to design a good visual representation what's going to help somebody understand the problem. What's the quintessential work that this person's trying to accomplish? Here's how it matters. Things that have come up for me before are things like, how do I represent a many-to-many mapping? Because really what somebody's trying to do is manage a many-to-many mapping. How do I do that? Oh, well, there's different representations, and here's a bunch of them. What's other ones? Similarity spaces like this one. Event-based kinds of representations. I'm helping somebody see events in time. Well, do I want a time-based dimension or do I want an event-based dimension? Or do I need both simultaneously? And how do I coordinate those together? But I need to show what the events look like and how they get laid out in time or whatever, so that somebody can understand, got it. I understand the nature of the work that you're trying to do and how you're trying to manage these events. And what's really fun is sometimes you get really lucky, you get really good. And what has become the representation to help people understand quickly gets turned into the representation that is the visual design for somebody else to do the work. It won't stand by itself usually because there's more detail around what needs to be done in the activity, but it becomes some core portion to help somebody go, aha, I get it. These are the points that I should be focusing on and not all of these ones. I could never see that before. It was just this long list of things. I didn't know where to look. So you're telling me I just need to highlight these ones and those are the ones I should check out? They're like, yes, those ones and these ones down here, actually. These ones are important too. And they're like, okay, great. And I can look at those and I can create the rest of the display around how do I quickly allow somebody to see those ones, evaluate them, note them in that frame of reference to move on to whatever's next in the process they've got. So you can take representation to help people understand, and it can become the thing that helps them actually doing the work. So many other things. Are people still here or people leave? Are we alone?
Nope, we still got a bunch of folks here.
Do people have questions about that? I mean, it's easier to show than it is to talk about. Um, it's almost like a really it's a really great way to run through a session with people. It's really the funnest way because you can come up with some fun, cool things pretty quickly for some problems that challenges things that you didn't really, think needed or could benefit from representations. This talking through it is tricky. I'm assuming frames of reference is still vague for people. Um, but yeah, it's about space. And what's tricky usually, in my experience, is how do you represent a space which is more than two dimensions, sometimes more than three? Like the many-to-many mapping often becomes that, and that's why you kind of default to a many-to-many mapping is because you're like, there's too many things that matter. It certainly reminds me of if you're doing like a analysis of some data and you've got some kind of linear or nonlinear equation and it's got more parameters than two, and you're like, I don't know how to, like, I can represent individual two parts, or I can do two and put two separate things in, two separate, another dimension inside of the space, the frame of reference that I've defined. But that's not quite the same thing, and it's hard to reason about it that way. I'd rather have them also be a dimension. So now you start going, okay, great. Dimension one, dimension two, dimension three is inside of the frame of reference. Then you go, okay, great. Now dimension one, dimension three, and now dimension two is inside of the frame of reference. You're like, that shows me something different. And we've probably all done this. That's doing frames of reference and trying to figure out which ones have the most meaning to you to help you understand the data. Chances are it's more than one. So how do you begin to coordinate those things?
Hmm.
When that happens, how do you coordinate these multiple frames of reference simultaneously when more than one matters? Something just
Yeah.
came up.
This has been fantastic, Alex, and it sounds like that would be a great topic for a future webinar. Maybe do a little bit more of an interactive demo to walk through some of that. Um, I think there's a lot of ground you covered here, and I think it's really important to have kind of like a case study, and the techniques that you provided to help folks here kind of think about influencing within their teams, their companies, to be able to adopt new practices, tools, principles. I kept thinking when you were talking about, the customer, it was like, well, this is like trying to influence leadership, right? Or this is trying to, kind of influence a dependent department that we work collectively with to kind of rethink the problem space and the possible solutions. So I think there was a good ability to kind of translate that from the sort of consultant to customer perspective to thinking about, how do we do this cross-functionally within teams.
Mhm.
Eric says, I think it would be helpful to see more examples of different frames of reference and different data and context. Yeah. And Adrian says a demo, yes, or a case study. So that we can talk about getting that on the calendar in the future. And Richard also echoes that as well. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming. I did drop the link to the newsletter sign up there. And we will have some newsletters coming out. Information's been sparse so far, but we'll get that out to you. And yeah, feedback is always welcome, and we look forward to seeing you December 2nd. We have Miriam Balkin again talking about resilience engineering application in the real world. And then we also have just sort of a foreshadowing for January, some special guests from Eurocontrol talking about sort of weak signals. And I will hopefully see you all there. Thank you again, Alex. Great to have you with us.
Yes, thank you, Laura. Thank you, everybody. Please reach out if you have any questions.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.